哦，不要人活了，人怕血人哦，一直到大家哦。
On July 11, 2026, Guangxi did not flood slowly. It gave way in hours. Torrential rain drove muddy water across roads, into low-lying communities, and through streets that had still been functioning normally earlier in the day. Vehicles disappeared up to their wheel wells, neighborhood access routes were swallowed, and entire sections of daily life began shutting down one layer at a time. What made the situation so dangerous was not only the volume of water, but the speed with which it stripped people of ordinary choices. A road that looked passable became a trap. A ground floor room became a hazard. A familiar street turned into a moving channel of brown floodwater carrying debris, silt, and panic through towns that had almost no time to reset before the next wave of rain arrived. Before the flooding took control, the day would have felt ordinary in the way dangerous weather often does just before it breaks. Roads were open. Shops were operating. People were moving through town networks and low-lying residential zones without yet seeing the full shape of the threat. Then the rainfall intensified, not as a distant inconvenience but as a direct pressure on everything built lower than the surrounding terrain. Drainage capacity began to fail. Water started to collect where it always collects first: road dips, intersections, access lanes, ground-level entrances, and vulnerable community edges. The warning signs were there, but in these events the transition from concern to emergency is brutally short. If you value serious, evidence-based disaster storytelling, stay with this one, because the most important part of a flood is often the moment when people realize the ground beneath routine is no longer reliable. As the rain continued, the visual character of the disaster changed. This was no longer just a storm overhead. The danger had become horizontal. Muddy floodwater started pushing through towns, spreading across streets in broad, opaque sheets and cutting off movement between neighborhoods. The color of the water mattered. It signaled not only runoff, but sediment, disturbed earth, and heavier debris moving with the current. That kind of water does more than cover roads. It reduces traction, conceals pavement edges, clogs drains, and carries enough force to push into buildings and sweep obstacles into already narrow escape paths. In low-lying communities, that shift is terrifying because it removes certainty all at once. You can no longer judge depth by sight. You can no longer trust a familiar shortcut. You can no longer assume the water will stop at the curb.
那个就是栏杆干的斜，那个栏杆干的斜，那个栏杆没得水没那么大的，就是桥头就嘛。
Còn đây đâu này?
Đâu lạnh thì kiện lắc đâu luôn.
Đây lạnh cô.
Then came the human compression point, the moment when geography and urgency collided. Residents were trapped by rising water, and emergency evacuations began. In disasters like this, evacuation is not a clean cinematic movement from danger to safety. It is improvised, loud, and uncertain. People try to judge whether to wait, move, lift belongings, help neighbors, or get out immediately while the street outside is already changing shape. Some communities would have found themselves isolated not because they were far away, but because every usable route around them had become unstable or submerged at nearly the same time. That is the part of flooding that transforms it from severe weather into a life safety event. The water does not have to be historic everywhere. It only has to be overwhelming at the exact points people depend on most. Once transportation networks started to fail, the disaster widened beyond homes and neighborhoods. Roads submerged. Movement slowed or stopped. Daily life, which depends on the uninterrupted function of corridors and crossings, began to seize up. A flood does not need to destroy every structure in order to paralyze a region. It only needs to break the links between them. When roads vanish under fast, muddy water, emergency access becomes harder, supply movement becomes uncertain, and even unaffected areas begin to feel the event through interruption alone. That is why flood disasters often seem to grow faster than maps can show. The water is only one part of the crisis. The loss of circulation is the other. If you come for fact-driven disaster analysis rather than empty spectacle, consider following the channel, because this is where the event stops being about rain and starts becoming about systemic interruption. The emotional center of the story sits with the residents who are forced to choose quickly under unstable conditions. Some would have been looking out from upper windows or doorways at streets they recognized but could no longer read. Others would have been trying to move children, elderly relatives, or essential belongings while rescue teams were still working their way in. Floodwater is especially cruel in low-lying towns because it does not simply threaten from a distance. It presses against thresholds. It enters familiar rooms. It turns ordinary objects, chairs, tools, parked scooters, market goods, stored boxes, into floating or contaminated obstacles. And when the water is muddy, the scene becomes even harder to process. Clarity disappears. Everything looks more unstable than it did minutes earlier. People are not only frightened by what the flood is doing, they are frightened by how little they can judge anymore. Emergency teams rushing into the affected areas changed the rhythm of the event, but not its seriousness. Rescue work during active flooding is never only about reaching one point and leaving. It is about negotiating access through blocked or submerged routes, assessing where people are trapped, and moving them without creating a second emergency. The data you provided makes clear that rescue teams were deployed quickly and that authorities stayed on high alert as additional rainfall remained possible. That second part matters. Rescue operations become more complex when the weather threat is still alive. Teams are not working in a stable aftermath. They are operating inside a disaster that may intensify again before the first evacuations are complete. If you respect real-world coverage that stays grounded in how emergencies actually unfold, stay with us, because the hardest phase of flooding is often not the first impact, but the period when responders know more rain could still re-energize everything they are trying to control. As more areas were affected, the scale of the Guangxi flooding became easier to understand. Roads were submerged not as isolated scenes, but as part of a wider breakdown across towns and low-lying zones. Transportation had come to a standstill. Communities were being cut into smaller, more fragile pockets. Every stalled route meant another delay in relief, another complication for evacuation, another layer of uncertainty for families waiting on updates. And with authorities warning that more rain could worsen the situation, the flood ceased to be a single burst of destruction and became an unfolding threat with no guaranteed endpoint yet visible from ground level. That ongoing uncertainty is what makes disasters like this so psychologically exhausting. People are not only dealing with what has happened, they are bracing for what the next hour might still bring. There is also a broader truth inside this event that often gets missed when floods are reduced to dramatic visuals alone. Flooding is not only about water depth. It is about speed, terrain, access, and timing. In Guangxi, the danger described here was amplified by low-lying communities being hit quickly enough to lose mobility within hours. That compression of time is what turns heavy rain into a crisis. It shortens reaction windows, multiplies rescue needs, and causes daily systems to fail before damage assessments can even begin. A flood that isolates people, submerges roads, and forces evacuations has already crossed into a different category of event, even before final numbers, full damage totals, or complete geographic maps are available. If you want more disaster documentaries built on realism, emotional truth, and disciplined reporting, keep watching this space. As the water eventually begins to slow or shift, the disaster does not end, it changes form. Mud remains. Roads stay compromised. Homes and shops face contamination, cleanup, and uncertainty about structural safety. Residents who are moved out must wait to learn what can be salvaged and what cannot. Communities that escaped the worst direct flooding may still remain functionally disrupted because roads, services, and normal patterns of movement have not returned. Authorities staying on high alert is not a dramatic gesture. It is an acknowledgement that the emergency is not over simply because the heaviest rainfall has passed one phase. In flood events, danger lingers in the conditions left behind: weakened access routes, unstable surfaces, dirty standing water, and the possibility that renewed rainfall could reactivate every vulnerable point again.